The movie opens with a dog mysteriously appearing out of nowhere, as if it teleported. The dog then makes its way home, only to find another dog there that looks just like him, clearly puzzled by the sudden appearance. This second dog goes to his owner, a scientist named Howard, who has been working on a time travel project for several months. On this particular day, Howard decides to use his dog to test the machine. He places the dog inside and sends it 5 minutes into the past. Instantly, the experiment succeeds. The dog vanishes and reappears 5 minutes earlier. That's when it all clicks, and we realize the teleportation we saw at the beginning was actually the result of this time travel experiment. We're then introduced to a man named James, a close friend of Howard. One day, James receives a strange phone call from Howard, urgently asking him to stop him from going somewhere. Confused and concerned, James heads straight to Howard's house to find out what's going on. When he arrives, he asks Howard, "What happened? Where exactly am I supposed to stop you from going?" But Howard looks just as puzzled and replies that he has no idea what James is talking about. James insists, saying, "You just called me and told me to stop you, but now you're acting like you didn't." Howard shrugs it off, thinking it must have been a prank or someone pretending to be him. Trying to change the subject, James then breaks the news. "By the way, the project you applied for, they've rejected it." But Howard, surprisingly calm, simply responds, "That's all right. I've already built the machine myself." After explaining the mechanics of the time machine to James, Howard decides to test it himself. He sets the machine to go back 5 minutes and activates it. In an instant, the machine powers up and Howard vanishes, only to suddenly reappear in his neighbor's house. Confused and disoriented, he finds himself in the bathroom, where a startled woman screams and begins hitting him. Howard quickly escapes and checks his watch, realizing with shock that he has actually traveled back in time. He races back to his own house, only to discover a shocking scene. One version of himself lies dead on the floor. Stunned, he asks James what happened. James explains that just moments ago, there were two versions of Howard. One shot the other, and the surviving one stepped into the time machine. Howard struggles to believe what he's hearing. Overwhelmed by the chaos, Howard considers destroying the machine to prevent further disasters, but James stops him. He urges Howard to think carefully. He's already gone back in time once, which means he can do it again to stop this from happening. Realizing the truth in his friend's words, Howard agrees. He gets back into the machine and activates it once more. This time, he teleports to the same location where his dog had first appeared earlier in the story. Howard rushes back to his house, determined to stop the tragic event and protect his earlier self. As he arrives, he sees one version of himself stepping into the time machine, while another version, Howard 2, enters from a different doorway. Startled by the sudden appearance of his own double, Howard panics and, without thinking, fires his gun, fatally shooting Howard 2. In that moment of horror, everything becomes clear. Howard finally pieces together how the earlier incident happened. He had been the cause all along. With this new understanding of the timeline and the chain of events, he prepares to travel back further, aiming to prevent the loop from repeating. Just as he's about to activate the machine again, James stops him with a confession. "I wasn't telling the truth earlier. Your experiment actually got approved. I was only joking." Then after a brief pause, he adds, "But I guess it doesn't really matter now." Howard, now fully committed to fixing everything, uses the time machine once more, jumping even further back in time. This new version of him, Howard 4, sets off once again toward his house. Along the way, he spots Howard 3 running ahead with urgency. Howard 4 shouts out to him, trying to get his attention, but Howard 3 doesn't stop. He's too focused, determined to save his own past self from being killed. In a hurry, Howard 3 finds James and pleads with him, telling him to intervene and stop the next tragic event before it happens. This is the very same call that James received at the beginning of the movie. Now, Howard 4 arrives at his house, but as soon as Howard 3 sees him, he panics. Without hesitation, he grabs a nearby gun and shoots Howard 4. As Howard 4 lies dying, he mutters with regret, "I'm the biggest fool in the world." With his death, the cycle begins once again. Howard 3 now follows the same path, stepping into the time machine in an attempt to stop his earlier self. He will soon become Howard 4 and repeat the same actions, unknowingly continuing the loop that has already played out. At this point, the story shifts to James's perspective. From his view, the machine clearly worked. Howard traveled through time, but he's also dead. Realizing the importance of the discovery, James decides to shut the machine down and take it with him. He wants to reveal to the world that it was Howard who built the first working time machine. Just as James is about to leave with the device, a second version of himself, James 2, arrives, rushing in to stop him. He warns him urgently, saying, If you do this, Howard won't let you go. He's probably arriving right now. James finally understands what's going on. He and James too return to the house and reset the time machine, putting everything back just as it was before. Soon, Howard too arrives. Upon seeing his own dead body, he urges James to destroy the machine, but James too stops him and instead tells him to use the machine again and travel back in time. Meanwhile, James 1 is secretly hiding nearby, listening to the entire conversation. Everything is happening exactly the way it did before, but this time we're seeing it all through James's point of view. As soon as Howard disappears into the machine, James 2 turns to James 1 and says, "Now you understand what you have to do." He tells James 1 that he must go back in time to stop his earlier version from taking the machine and triggering the loop. In other words, he must repeat everything that has already happened. James 1 nods. He gets it now because he and James 2 are the same person. They both lived through this before. With that, James 1 steps into the time machine and vanishes. The moment he's gone, James 2 shuts the machine down and carries it away with him. And this is where the film ends. We're not shown what happens next, but we're left to piece it together ourselves. James 1 has now traveled back in time and will eventually become James 2, repeating the same actions again. On the other hand, when Howard uses the time machine for the first time, he becomes Howard 2 and also continues the same cycle. In the end, it becomes clear. The loop will never end. Howard and James are trapped in an endless cycle of time travel, repeating the same events over and over. Howard 4 dies, and James 2 walks away with the machine. And that's it, friends. This short film packs a lot into a small runtime. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. See you next time with another mind-bending story.